welcome to The Score, where we make sense of hiring trends, we sort science from fiction, and we find out what's new in talent acquisition from top experts in the field. I'm Nicola Tatham. I'm the Chief IO Psychologist here at Sova, with over 2 decades of experience designing fair, predictive, and science-backed talent assessments. I'm here to cut through the noise and talk about what actually works in hiring.
And I'm Caroline Fry, Head of Product. I spend my time turning smart assessment ideas from NICs into tools that work, scalable, inclusive, and ready for whatever AI throws at us next.
So each episode, we're joined by a guest to unpack a big question in hiring.
Because talent deserves better than guesswork. And today, we are joined by Darren Jaffrey, CEO of Sova. Darren has spent his career at the intersection of technology and talent, from running global teams in some of the biggest HR tech firms in the world to now leading Sova. He brings a rare mix of commercial leadership and deep understanding of the science behind great hiring. And he's here to share his insights on the future of talent assessment. Welcome, Darren.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Good.
Thanks for joining us, Darren. We always like to start the podcast with something quite light, just to warm things up. So my first question to you is, what's the most unexpected thing that you've ever been asked during an interview? It might be funny, weird, or just one of those moments that stuck with you. Anything spring to mind?
So when I was a much younger man than I am now, I interviewed with Unilever for a role to deploy a technology platform for them globally. And in the interview, which was clearly going quite well at the time, I was asked, would I be prepared to spend the next 12 months traveling the world, working for Unilever, deploying this technology, to which I very enthusiastically said, yes, of course I would. And then I was asked which countries I'd been banned from entering and couldn't visit as part of that journey, to which I was happy to report at the time, and still now, that is none. So got the job, and actually was my first foray into the talent management space loosely, working for what was and still is an absolutely outstanding brand.
I wonder about the quality of the candidates they're asking that kind of question in the interview process.
Or what research they'd done ahead of Darren arriving.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Darren. That's an interesting one. Not one we've heard before. So getting into the more in-depth part of the conversation now. In your experience, how does a CEO think about the balance between commercial growth, product innovation, and scientific integrity?
So, I spent a lot of time thinking about this earlier on in my career. Now I don't need to, because I have what I consider to be the code, the answer that works for me and for the firms that I've run. And I'm basically a big believer in foundations. Doesn't really matter if you're building a house, a business, your life. It's all based on solid foundations. And the foundation element of what we do at Sova is scientific integrity. On top of that, you can layer product innovation. You can only do that once the scientific integrity has been achieved, has been proven, is demonstrable. Then you layer on the innovation. Once you've got those 2 things in place, the commercial growth will take care of itself. So that's the building blocks that I had. The converse of that is if you focused initially on commercial growth only, and some startups do, I appreciate that, they need to get to revenue relatively quickly. You don't put the right foundations in place, and as sure as eggs is eggs, eventually that business will stumble and fail to scale. So for me, it's crystal clear. It is scientific integrity, then it's innovation, and then the rest will look after itself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And good to hear that the scientific integrity is at the bottom of that foundation. It's the building block, isn't it? The first port of call. So moving on a little from that, we have talked about the science behind what we do. So in your view, what role should CEOs play in shaping the fairness and the integrity of the hiring process?
I think that I could give you a similar answer to many questions actually around this in terms of the role of the CEO. First and foremost, the role of a CEO is to set the tone. I always feel like I should lead by example, and in this case, establish the cultural and ethical expectations that I have of the organization. it's not lost on me that the attitude that I demonstrate towards fairness and transparency will percolate and resonate throughout the firm. So I just try to be consistent inside our own firm, but also when I'm working with our customers and with my shareholders and with our partners, by just articulating our values on inclusivity and equitable hiring and just set the precedent. CEOs are not just figureheads. We are, to a degree, the culture carriers in an organization, and so carry that culture and lead from the front.
So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I guess kind of related to that, in your opinion, what's the most overlooked ingredient in building a successful HR tech company?
I think probably, as I think about this quite often, because it obviously predicates what we're trying to do from a product perspective. And I, in my time in the space, I've just seen probably an underinvestment in the user. There's an overemphasis sometimes in designing technology, particularly for startups. And I get it. I do get it, because they're looking to make revenue and they're looking for customers. And so they place an unnatural degree of emphasis on the buyer and not the user. And, building a piece of technology for HR leadership or procurement is a surefire way to not see that technology get adopted. And so that in and of itself then prohibits the expansion of the technology. So products need to feel intuitive. They've got to solve daily plays. They just have to be sticky. And too often, I don't think that design principle is built in at core. In a nutshell, invest in the users, not the buyers. And that's a bit controversial, because, everybody's after the buyer, but actually they're not our constituents. Our constituents are our users. They can be recruiters, they can be hiring managers, they can definitely be candidates. Spend your time worrying about their lives, not the global head of talent for a Fortune 500 company, because that's not your customer.
I think this links to a conversation we've had previously on the podcast, where what are your measures of success when you're working with a client? And it's going to be things like adoption, isn't it? Not, just not making the sale and walking away. It's ensuring that the people that you've designed the system for actually choose to use it and actually enjoy that experience.
Well, absolutely. And the reality is, we live in a world now that might have worked 20 years ago, when large companies were selling on-premise systems where it was a one-time massive great big check and then you walk away, and whether it got adopted or not, it didn't matter. We live in a world of software as a service. Every 12 months, we have to earn the right to renew the contract that we sold 12 months ago. And the number one driver behind that is adoption, full stop. You can look at that a million different ways, and I will tell you, we'll always come back to adoption. So if you get that right, then you're halfway towards having that positive conversation every 12 months, and that's a good place to be.
I think, obviously, leading a product team, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that's how you prove value, right? Like that's the metric for value, ongoing, which is what we all need to strive for. And I think, you're right as well. There are many users, and that's something I have to worry about a lot across our product, which is actually effectively multiple products depending on the user that you're working with. And I think we hear probably less about the client users, the administrators, the HR managers than we do at the moment about candidate experience. And I did want to ask you about candidate experience, which I think has traditionally been seen as a sort of operational issue. But do you think it's becoming a strategic concern at the C-level? And if so, why?
I mean, it is. I think it always has been. It certainly has been in my mind. If you were to break it down, it's probably three principal reasons, probably more, but three that really come to mind. I mean, first of all, talent is a competitive advantage for any brand, right? For any company. So the people in your business are massively important, because in a knowledge and innovation economy, companies don't win because of the assets they got. They win because of the people that they hire. Yeah, of course, candidate experience is important in that respect. A good candidate experience will obviously positively affect your ability to attract, hire top talent. And that matters, because we're all companies, my little company, all the way up to the Unilevers of this world, are looking for that top talent. Talent's a competitive advantage. Secondly, candidates not only are they customers of the brand, and they've always been a customer of a brand, and there's always been this thing in the talent management space of treat your candidates like customers. Well, they're also influencers, and they're also investors potentially in your brand. So, it's hugely important that you create a good experience, because those candidates are now rating and reviewing you in the same way as they do products, be it on Glassdoor or LinkedIn or TikTok, or this experience that they have will go viral, will get amplified, and it's important that you absolutely get it right. And I think the final one is, and this sometimes gets lost a little bit, but for me is actually really important. Candidate experience just signals culture. This is the first engagement that a candidate is going to have with your organization. And the hiring process is fundamentally a proxy for the company's values and how it behaves. If it's a clunky, laborious, unengaging experience, that just signals what the experience is going to be like post-hire, right? And that can be a massive red flag for candidates. So, the culture that you're trying to set in your organization starts before day one. It starts as part of the hiring process. So signal it correctly, signal it positively, and just deliver a world-class candidate experience wherever you can. It's something I really fixate on. I know you do, Caroline, as well, but it's often overlooked and potentially undervalued, and I think that's just a massive mistake.
Absolutely agree. As you've already said, I think actually it's something that the talent assessment industry has been a bit guilty of doing poorly and being behind the times. We talk so much about consumer grade, and I think once the candidates get actually into those assessment experiences, they're not very exciting. They're not very engaging for the most part, even with the biggest unicorns in the industry. I think possibly in the last couple of years with AI, of course, like everything is leveling up. But I think for a long time, probably not because of the science, but because the science has been so powerful and important and actually predictive and useful, that's the experience I think has become secondary to that, when I think you can just have both, I think, quite frankly. Slightly related, when you're talking about your path and probably defining your path, that's easier said than done. I think we know that. You can get blown off course, industry trends change, and predicting the future is difficult. And I mentioned AI briefly earlier, of course. It's everywhere at the moment, and there is a lot of hype. What do you see with AI as genuinely transformative, and what's just noise?
So generally transformative in our category that I've seen, things like adaptive testing. I like that. I've seen that come to the fore, where AI can sort of dynamically adjust question types and difficulties based on prior candidate responses. I don't think that's been historically that achievable. I think its generic name for it is CAT, isn't it? Computerized adaptive testing. But I think that's really cool, and I like that. Bias detection at scale, that's really real and achievable, and historically was always an issue. There is inherently bias built into every type of assessment, and we can talk about, if there is such a thing as a bias-free assessment a bit later on. But the detection of it in terms of doing assessment audits using AI, I think that's really powerful, and I like that. The other thing, maybe the final thing that I've really seen manifest itself so far, is it's beginning AI to allow for enhanced feedback and personalization of an assessment experience. So it takes us all the way back to that candidate experience of trying to make it consumer grade, engaging, immersive, not feel like you're going through a process, but actually feel like you're having an experience. That absolutely I've seen happening. And just at the end of that process, the way that AI can sort of turn raw scores into kind of rich, personalized insights for an individual, that's really attractive and appealing. So I think that's some areas that have been generally transformative. I mean, there's plenty of hype out there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about the hype? I mean, I'm a big. I've come from a world where I've seen a lot of pronouncements made, and the reality not quite match up to that. And I think the biggest culprit of that probably that I've seen is around the area of personality prediction from video or voice or social media, and the use of those technologies to be able to do personality prediction. I mean, first of all, it's just fraught with cultural bias, right? That kind of stuff. But I just don't think it works. I think people say that it does, but I don't think it does, honestly. So, it's a minefield. There's good and bad. We are navigating at the moment through the minefield. At some point on this AI journey that we as a company are on, and our industry and frankly humanity is on, we'll be somewhat the other side of it and be able to look back and go, oh, we got through that minefield. But right now I feel like we're still in the minefield.
Agreed. It's exciting times and creating more opportunities for more sort of interdisciplinary projects and work now, where IOs aren't sitting, like not leading the way in all of the assessment design. There's so many different people that are inputting to enable us to create great assessments that retain the rigor, the candidate experience, and make the most of the technology that's now available to us. Yes, I guess just building on that. Our last question to you in this section is what's your vision for where the assessment industry should be heading in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, having just had a bit of a rant about
Yeah.
AI,
Yeah.
clearly, so where do I see it? Well, I think a few things. Think it's almost inevitable, as with every other industry that I look at and I interact with on a daily basis, just as me, that we will move to more of an agentic experience within assessment. The assessments themselves will be and feel like it's agentic AI, and I think we've all lived and breathed in those. It doesn't matter whether you're moving house and you want to kind of speak to British Gas or Centrica or whoever it is, you're going through that agentic experience as your point of engagement. I think that's sort of inevitable. We really need to crack the code, I think, on how to make the experience more engaging, more immersive. And I'm a big believer in the concept of work samples. You'll be familiar with those, Nicola, from the work that you do, which, work samples are, and I think a university recognized as the most scientifically valid way to predict job performance. So how can we embrace the concept of work samples and bring them into the assessment experience? Historically, it's been quite hard because they tend to be fairly nuanced. They don't scale terribly well. Well, maybe with AI, there's a way to make that, to break that down into its constituent parts and actually deliver individual work samples for individual roles for candidates who are applying for positions. Because at the end of the day, people are applying to positions generally, even if they're applying to a graduate program at a Fortune 500 firm. There are things that they are going to do within that organization, within the culture of that organization, that are fairly nuanced and fairly specific. Well, why not find out what their capabilities are like about those tasks rather than just how numerate are they? What's their verbal reasoning like? Yeah, all that stuff's great. I get it. And it's predictive, but there are better ways of doing this. And then, if we're delivering this agentic experience and we're leaning in on work samples, please, please, please deliver it in a consumer grade experience. Our candidates, our customers' candidates, their future talent is the Netflix generation. They are used to an experience that historically assessments haven't delivered, and we absolutely have to lean in on that. So I guess at the transition of those three things feels like the holy grail for me, and that's where I know we spend a lot of time as a company thinking about how we want to address those three challenges. We can bring them all together. I think we're on the cusp of a new way of assessing individuals that feels more engaging, more immersive, frankly more enjoyable, and is even more predictive. So that's good, right?
Yeah. Watch the space then.
Watch the space.
Thank you. So as we head towards the end of the episode, we're going to play a quick game called Science or Fiction. We will read out a few claims, and then it's up to you to decide which are backed by evidence and which are just plain old assessment myths. So don't worry, all in good fun. No right or wrong answers. So the first question is, candidate experience is a nice to have, not a must have.
Fiction.
I mean, there's no surprise that you've answered that as fiction, and that we have talked about that quite a lot, over the last few minutes. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that, just to support that argument even more?
No, I would just refer the learned listeners to the previous 30 minutes worth of content. That is, of all the statements you're going to give me, I can't imagine I'm going to think anything is more fiction than that one.
Okay. Controversial considering Nick is right here. The next one is you don't need IO psychologists if you have data scientists.
Easy fiction.
Answer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you want to
two
explain?
different fields. Two different. That's like saying, desperately trying to come up with an analogy on the fly. If you're going to an operating theatre, there's a surgeon and somebody that controls the an anaesthetist. That's not easy to say on a podcast. They do very different things, right? They're part of a team that are ultimately delivering, you hope, a successful outcome. IO psychologists and data scientists are different beasts, and so that's absolutely fiction as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, so next one, data without context is worse than no data at all.
Data without context is worse than no data at all. Probably science on that. I mean, no data at all. Nobody's making any decisions on it. Data without context, people are going to be making decisions on it and probably making incorrect decisions. So I would say that's probably science, actually.
So yeah, sort of your false negatives, false positives are
Yeah.
going to start kicking in at that point.
Okay. Next one. Diverse, inclusive hiring starts long before the assessment.
Definitely science. Definitely. We could take you all the way back to the conversation we had earlier about candidate experience signaling culture. Even before you get into the interview process or the assessment process, there's work that's been going on in an organization to kind of signal who they are. So no, science, all day long science.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm very comfortable with my answer.
And finally, CEOs don't need to understand psychometrics. That's what the experts are for.
Goodness me. Okay. Here's a curveball. That's science and fiction.
Go on.
And I'll tell you why. Because I think if the CEO is the founder or the founder of the company is the CEO at a point in time through the company's growth, I think it's really, really, really important that the CEO understands the core proposition, the foundation. So early stage startup, founder-led CEO, founder-led businesses where the founder becomes the CEO, really important. I think really important. I think at a point in time when you're beginning to want to scale the organization, then actually you want a different type of CEO. You want perhaps someone that's more commercially savvy and who relies on the experts, empowers them and gets out of their way and lets them bring their expertise. So I think the answer to that depends very much where you are on the kind of the growth curve. And I can see an argument for both. Where we are right now as Sova, we're a little bit further along the growth curve. I'm fortunate I've got some wonderful colleagues that I can lean in on to help me understand product and psychometric direction. And that's what I do. And I think that's what most CEOs do.
Thank you, Darren. I think that's quite a nice sort of final thought, should we say, or near final thought as we come to the end of our episode. Thank you so much for joining us. And you have given us a lot to think about, from strategy to science to AI and lots in between. If you had to leave our listeners with one takeaway about the future of hiring, what would it be?
I think it's bright. I think it's about to become a much more engaging, immersive, predictive experience. And our category in our little piece of the technology world in which we exist is going through one of the biggest periods of revolutionary change that we've seen in probably 20, 30 years. I think it's super exciting where we're at right now, but it's not exciting just for the sake of it. I think what's on the other side of it is great for candidates, is great for customers, is great for just both sides of the both constituent parties, and that feels like a really good place to be for me. So I think it's bright and super exciting.
Agreed. Slightly terrifying at times as well.
So
That's why we're here. That's why we're here. Well, thank you. That's been a really interesting session. I think in terms of some of my takeaways from this conversation, a key theme that's come across from a lot of your responses has been that the foundations matter. So those foundations might be about the way that you start your business, the sort of direction of travel when it comes to your business. It might be about your team and how you build that team and build a team that you can trust to get on with the job. And then you can also apply the foundations matter element to your assessments and how you design your assessments any platforms as well. So regardless of what AI does, the ways of working within a business go, the foundations remain like the key element for attaining those success measures that we've talked about, whatever they may be, basically. So yeah, Caroline, is there anything you wanted to add today?
I think alongside that, which, yeah, I agree, has come through pretty much everything that Darren said. I think the other thing that I find contagious is the optimism that you still have, Darren, for the industry generally. You've had a career in talent assessment spanning decades, and that experience and what you've, worked through in your career, you're still engaged, you're looking forward, you're saying the future's bright. You think we're actually at quite a pivotal time within the industry. And, I don't have decades, but I have probably at least a decade. And I've seen that change too. And it really aligns to my experience, where I think even in the last decade, we've come a really long way in terms of some of those elements around technology, candidate experience. And I agree, Nick, AI can be scary. We've talked about that in previous podcasts. It can feel really overwhelming, but there's really useful, true areas of application that are really exciting for our industry. So yeah, I really respond to the whole future's bright idea, because I think I can see that playing out in, our day-to-day work and what our clients are doing. So yeah, thanks for your continued optimism, Darren.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Well, thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Fabulous. And thanks to everyone for hanging out with us on The Score. If you enjoyed this look behind the scenes of how leadership, science and candidate experience come together, don't miss what's coming next. So new episodes drop every 2 weeks on YouTube, on Spotify, or wherever you get your talent assessment insights.